A socialite in a $10,000 gown leaned close enough that her perfume burned. She looked Nyla Vaughn up and down. The borrowed dress, the worn heels, the body that didn't fit the room, and said, loudly, deliberately, so the whole table could hear, "Sweetheart, this gala is for people who actually matter, not the help." The laughter that followed was quiet, polished, the cruelest kind. Nyla stood completely still. Her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't crack, because she had survived worse things than a rich woman's contempt. What she didn't know, what no one in that glittering ballroom knew, was that the man who had just walked through the front door had once eaten half of her last sandwich on a cold Boston bus. And he had never forgotten it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought your worth was written on your clothes, stay with me. This story is for you. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from right now? I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The number 39 bus smelled like wet coats and fast food wrappers, and the particular kind of exhaustion that only comes from working 2 jobs in one day without eating a real meal since 6 in the morning. Nyla Vaughn dropped into the first open seat she found, pressed her back against the cold window, and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. 4 seconds of nothing. Then she straightened up, shifted her library tote bag onto her lap, and pulled out the one thing she'd been thinking about since 3 o'clock that afternoon. A turkey sandwich wrapped in a paper napkin, slightly squashed from being at the bottom of the bag all day. She'd made it herself that morning. Whole wheat bread, deli turkey she'd bought on sale, a little mustard. Nothing fancy. But she hadn't eaten since the granola bar she'd choked down at 7 a.m. And it was now nearly 9 at night, and her stomach had moved well past growling into something that felt almost personal, like a grudge. She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, careful not to let any of the napkin tear. Outside, the rain hit the bus windows in long diagonal streaks. The streetlights blurred orange against the glass. Boston in November looked like a city that had given up trying to be beautiful and was just trying to survive until spring. Nyla understood that feeling completely. She took one bite, let herself taste it, closed her eyes again, not 4 seconds this time, longer. And for just a moment, she wasn't a 34-year-old woman with $62,000 in debt, a 16-year-old nephew who was grieving in ways she didn't always know how to reach, and a shift at the library starting at 7:30 tomorrow morning. For just a moment, she was just a woman eating a sandwich on a bus. Then the man across the aisle shifted in his seat, and his stomach made a sound. Not a polite, socially deniable sound. A deep, hollow, unmistakable sound. The sound of someone who hadn't eaten in a very long time. Nyla opened her eyes. He was sitting diagonally across from her, near the window, turned slightly away. Black coat. Expensive. She could tell even from a distance, the way the fabric sat differently than the kind of coat you bought because you needed to be warm. His hands were resting on his knees, very still, the kind of stillness that isn't relaxed but controlled, like a man who had learned to make himself small when he needed to. His face was turned toward the rain, and she could see a cut along his jaw, dark at the edges, not old enough to have fully scabbed over. He looked exhausted in the specific way that comes not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something very heavy for a very long time. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He stared at the rain with the expression of a man working out a problem in his head that had no clean solution. Nyla looked down at her sandwich, then back at him. She did the math quickly, the way she always did. She had exactly one other thing in her bag that could count as food. A sleeve of peanut butter crackers she'd been saving for Micah's after-school snack tomorrow. She wasn't going to touch those. That left the sandwich, half of which she had already eaten, half of which remained. It wasn't a difficult decision. She had never been able to explain this to people who thought it should be. Her mother had called it reckless. Her coworker Denise called it the reason Nyla would never get ahead. But it was just the way she was built. When someone near her was hungry, something in her simply responded. She rewrapped the remaining half carefully, smoothed the napkin around it, and leaned across the aisle. "Hey," she said, quietly, not drawing attention. "I've got more than I can eat." He turned. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the low bus light. They landed on her with the kind of wariness she sometimes saw in the teenagers who came into the library. Kids who'd learned that generosity always had a catch, that kindness was usually the setup for something worse. He looked at the sandwich, then at her, a long, measuring pause. "I don't need your charity," he said. His voice was low, careful, accent flattened. The voice of someone who had worked hard to sound like he came from nowhere in particular. "It's not charity," Nyla said. "It's half a turkey sandwich. It's not going to fix your life. It's just food." She put it on the empty seat between them and turned back to her window. For a long moment, nothing happened. She could feel him looking at the sandwich, then at her, then at the sandwich again. She didn't push. She didn't watch him. She just looked at the rain and let him make his own choice. He took it. She heard the rustle of the napkin. A pause. Then the quiet of someone eating slowly, deliberately, like a man reminding himself not to rush. She didn't look over. She pulled out her phone and pretended to check her messages, though there was nothing important there, just an automated text from the electric company about a bill she already knew about and already couldn't fully pay. When the bus reached his stop, she didn't know it was his stop, she just heard him stand. He paused in the aisle. She looked up. He was holding the folded napkin in one hand, not crumpled the way you'd crumple something you were about to throw away, but held, just held. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Why?" Nyla shrugged. "Kindness matters most when no one can pay you back." He didn't say anything to that. He just looked at her for another second, the way you look at something you're trying to memorize. And then he walked off the bus into the rain. The doors closed. The bus pulled forward. Nyla pressed her back against the window and closed her eyes. Her stomach was still a little empty. Her feet still hurt. She still had $62,000 in debt and a shift at 7:30 and a nephew who cried in his room at night thinking she couldn't hear him through the wall. She forgot about the stranger before she reached her stop. He never forgot about her. What Nyla didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the man who walked off that bus into the November rain was named Lucien Devereaux. And 3 hours earlier, someone had tried to kill him. Not in the abstract, political sense of the word. Not a business threat or a legal maneuver or a hostile negotiation. Actually tried. 2 cars. 6 men with professional patience and suppressed weapons, and a route pre-planned well enough that whoever organized it had access to his schedule, his security rotation, and his private movements. That kind of access didn't come from enemies outside. It came from inside. Lucien had survived by doing what he'd trained himself to do since he was 19 years old, thinking faster than everyone around him and trusting no one. He'd left his driver 2 blocks early, doubled back through a parking garage, switched coats with a vendor he paid in cash, and disappeared into the city the way water disappears into concrete, completely, leaving no trace. He had 4 phones. He turned them all off. He had a safe house in Charlestown and 2 more in Cambridge, but he hadn't gone to any of them. Anyone who knew about those locations was now under suspicion. Instead, he had boarded a public bus going east and sat very still and tried to identify, from the list of people who could have arranged tonight's operation, which name felt most wrong. He'd narrowed it to 3 before he boarded the bus. He'd narrowed it to 2 before the woman across the aisle offered him half her sandwich. And then, for the 17 minutes it took him to eat it and the bus to reach his stop, he hadn't thought about any of it at all. That had never happened before. Not once in 22 years of operating at the level he operated. He had learned to think while eating, while sleeping, while doing everything. The part of his brain that processed threat and counter-threat never went quiet. He had accepted this the way you accept a physical limitation. Some people couldn't run far. He couldn't stop calculating. For 17 minutes on a city bus in the rain, eating half a turkey sandwich wrapped in a paper napkin, he had just existed. He stood on the wet sidewalk after the bus pulled away and looked at the napkin in his hand. It was printed with small blue diamonds, the cheap disposable kind. She'd wrapped it carefully, smoothed the edges. He didn't throw it away. He folded it twice and put it in the interior pocket of his coat next to the emergency phone he kept there. Then he walked 3 blocks north, made a call from a payphone, one of the 6 remaining working payphones in Boston. He knew the location of all of them. And within 40 minutes had a secure car and a plan. But the napkin stayed in his pocket. Even then, he wasn't sure why. Nyla's apartment was on the third floor of a triple-decker in Dorchester, 3 blocks from the elementary school where she'd grown up and 4 from the library branch where she'd gotten her first card at age 7. She had grown up in this neighborhood, left for college, come back when her sister got sick, and stayed when everything after that made leaving impossible. The apartment was small and always slightly cold in winter because the landlord's idea of maintaining the heating system was ignoring complaints for 60 days and then sending someone to look at it and leave without fixing anything. She had 3 extra blankets on her bed and kept the kitchen oven cracked open at night when the temperature dropped below 20. She had stopped fighting with the landlord about it because fighting took energy she needed for other things. She unlocked the door and found Micah at the kitchen table with his headphones on and a textbook open in front of him that he was almost certainly not reading. He was 16, long and thin, with his mother's eyes and his mother's habit of turning away when he didn't want you to see what he was feeling. He'd been living with Nyla for 14 months. He still slept with his door open 3 inches. She had never asked him why. She understood without asking. She put her bag down and started to say something, and then she saw the paper on the table in front of him. A school bill, activity fees, sports registration, and a line item labeled class trip deposit that she had not seen before. "It's not a big deal," Micah said, not looking up, pretending he hadn't been waiting for her to see it. "What's the trip?" "DC history class, January." He turned a page he definitely hadn't read. "I'm not going. You want to go?" A pause. "Doesn't matter." Nyla sat down across from him and waited until he looked up, because she had learned that trying to have a real conversation with Micah before eye contact was just talking at a wall. He looked up after a moment. His eyes were tired. 16 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with how late he'd stayed up. "You should go," she said. "Aunt Nyla, I'll figure it out." He looked at her the way teenagers look at adults when they know the adult is lying but don't want to call them on it. It was a look that contained both love and exhaustion, and it landed somewhere in her chest and sat there. "I don't want you to figure it out," he said. "I want you to not stress about it. Those 2 things aren't available at the same time right now." He almost smiled. Almost. She made them both tea. She'd run out of coffee 3 days ago and hadn't had a chance to replace it. And they sat together in the small kitchen without talking very much, the radio on low, the rain still going outside, and for a little while the bills and the debt and the exhaustion were still there, but they stayed at the edges of the room where she could ignore them. Before she went to bed, Nyla sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen and did what she did every few weeks, wrote down everything she owed, everything she earned, and tried to find the space between them. There was never space. There was always a gap, a shortfall, a place where the numbers simply didn't work no matter how many times she added and subtracted and moved things around. She put the pen down after 40 minutes and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then she thought, briefly and without drama, about the man on the bus, the exhaustion in his face, the cut on his jaw, the way he'd held the napkin like it meant something. She wondered if he was okay, whoever he was. She hoped he'd found somewhere warm to sleep. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 3 weeks later, a man named Luke Delaney walked into the Boston Public Library on Boylston Street for the first time, asked for a library card, and signed up for access to the Historical Archives section. He said he was a shipping consultant researching the history of Boston Harbor for a client project. The librarian at the front desk processed his information without looking up. He walked through the stacks slowly, the way people do when they're pretending to look for something specific while actually looking for something else entirely. He found it at the far end of the children's section, where a woman with natural hair pinned up under a patterned head wrap was sitting on a small stool reading aloud to a group of kids between the ages of maybe 5 and 9. She was reading with her whole body, her hands moving, her voice changing for each character, her eyes moving between the page and the children's faces to make sure she hadn't lost any of them. One little girl had fallen asleep against the bookshelf with a picture book open on her lap. The woman noticed, stopped mid-sentence, stood up carefully, removed her own cardigan, and draped it over the child without waking her. Then she sat back down and kept reading. Lucien Devereaux stood in the shadow of the biography section and watched for 11 minutes before he walked quietly back to the history archives. He came back the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th day, she noticed him. She was pushing a returns cart past the history section when she stopped, looked at him directly and said, "You were here yesterday and the day before." He looked up from the microfilm reader. "I'm doing research. You haven't checked anything out yet." He had no answer for that. She tilted her head. "Can I help you find something?" He almost said no. The word was already in his mouth, the automatic reflex of a man who had survived 22 years by keeping people at exactly the right distance. Instead, he said, "Actually, yes. Where would I find records from the 1920s shipping registries, northeastern ports?" She pointed without hesitation. "Third row from the left, bottom shelf. The digitized versions are faster. I can show you how to navigate the system if the interface is giving you trouble. It's not intuitive." "That would help," he said. "Thank you." She walked him to the terminal and showed him the search function in about 90 seconds, clear and efficient. She had a small smudge of something blue, pen ink maybe, on the outside of her left wrist. She smelled like the library, dust and paper and something that might have been cinnamon. She started to walk away, then turned back. "I'm Nyla, by the way. If you need anything else." "Luke," he said. "Luke Delaney." She nodded and pushed her cart around the corner and disappeared. He sat there for a moment, looking at the microfilm reader without seeing it. He had run background operations on hundreds of people. He had ordered surveillance on city officials, rival organizations, financial competitors, government contacts. He had files on prosecutors and judges and police commissioners. He had never felt anything while reading them. The report on Nyla Vaughn had sat on his desk for 4 days before he could put it down. Not because of anything suspicious, because there was nothing suspicious. Because the report was just the record of a woman who spent every spare hour she had making other people's lives slightly less hard, who owed more money than she would probably ever pay off, who had taken in her dead sister's son without hesitation, who still bought extra peanut butter at the food pantry drop-off even when she was late for work. He had thought, reviewing that file in the silence of his office at 2 a.m, who does that? Who is still like that? He had been trying to answer that question for 3 weeks. He suspected it was going to take considerably longer. What Lucien didn't know, what he couldn't yet see from where he sat at the microfilm terminal, was that 2 floors up in a parking garage directly across the street, a man in a gray car had been following him for 4 days. Vincent Caldera was not stupid. He was patient, which was almost better. He had been Lucien's underboss for 7 years, had helped build the operation from a regional concern into what it was now, and had spent the last 3 of those years watching Lucien make decisions that should have been made by 2 men and waiting for the moment when that kind of singular control became a liability rather than a strength. He hadn't ordered the assassination attempt. He wanted it understood, internally, that the record showed clearly that he hadn't done that. He had only known about it. He had only not stopped it. And when it failed, when Lucien walked out of it alive and disappeared for 11 days, and then impossibly emerged on the other side more controlled and more focused than he'd been in months, Vincent had done what he always did. He recalibrated. He found the thread. He pulled it carefully. And the thread had led him here, to this library, to this woman pushing a cart of returned books through the stacks on a Tuesday afternoon, who didn't know what she was or what she was about to become. Vincent lit a cigarette, cracked the car window, and watched the library entrance with the patience of a man who understood that the most dangerous weapon was never the one you could see coming. It was the one that didn't know yet that it was a weapon at all. Vincent Caldera smoked 2 cigarettes in that parking garage before he made his first call. He didn't call anyone in Lucien's inner circle. He was smarter than that. He called a man named Greg Salter, who worked for a private information firm that didn't advertise and didn't have a website, and whose entire client list could be summarized as people who needed to know things that other people were actively trying to keep hidden. Greg charged accordingly. "I need everything on a woman," Vincent said. "Name's probably Vaughn. She works at a public library on Boylston. Start there." Timeline? Yesterday. He dropped the call, crushed the cigarette against the concrete ledge, and watched a city bus pull up to the stop below. A woman got off with 2 reusable grocery bags and a backpack and walked in the direction of the library without hurrying. Not her. Too old. He watched anyway because watching was the job, and the job was the only thing Vincent Caldera had ever been consistently good at. He had not built Lucien's empire. He wanted that clear in his own mind, even if history would never record it correctly. He had maintained it. He had handled the negotiations Lucien found beneath him, the personnel problems Lucien didn't have patience for, the dozen small fires every week that never reached Lucien's desk because Vincent put them out first. He had done this for 7 years. He had done it well. He had done it without complaint. What he had never done, what no one had ever offered him, was credit. The cigarette pack was empty. He crushed it and put it in his coat pocket because Vincent Caldera did not leave things behind. Below, the library doors opened and closed. Just another afternoon in a city that didn't know what was happening inside it. He started the car and drove. Inside the library, Lucien was staring at a microfilm image of a 1924 shipping manifest without reading a single word of it. He was listening, not to anything specific. He'd developed this skill young, the ability to register the sounds around him at a subconscious level, the rhythm of a room, the way noise organized itself when everything was normal versus the way it changed when something was wrong. It was like a frequency he'd learned to tune. Most days it was background. Right now it was telling him something. He couldn't identify what. He rolled back the microfilm, closed the viewer, and stood. He straightened his jacket, walked to the window at the far end of the archives room, and looked out at the street below. Traffic, a woman with a stroller, a food cart, a parking garage across the street, mostly empty this time of day, a gray car on the second level, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he walked back to his table, collected nothing because he'd brought nothing worth collecting, and left the archives. He didn't leave through the front entrance. Nyla was in the back room doing something that she was technically not supposed to be doing on library time, which was repairing a picture book with a cracked spine using a specific archival adhesive that she'd bought with her own money because the library's budget for materials had been cut 18 months ago. And the replacement cycle for damaged children's books was now 14 weeks, which meant a book with a broken spine sat on a shelf looking broken for over 3 months before anyone replaced it, which meant children saw it and didn't pick it up, and Nyla had strong feelings about that. She was pressing the spine flat with 2 fingers, holding it steady, when someone knocked on the open door frame. She looked up. It was Luke Delaney, which surprised her because researchers didn't usually come back here unless they were lost. "Wrong turn?" she said. "No." He paused. He was still wearing his coat. "Can I ask you something?" "You can try." He came in, just a step, staying near the door, which she noticed. People who'd spent time around libraries did that. They treated space as something that required permission. "The child from yesterday," he said, "the one who fell asleep. Did she come back today?" Nyla looked at him. Of all the questions she'd been expecting, that was not one of them. "Maya," she said. "Yeah, she came back. Why?" She seemed... He paused, searching for the right word. Scared of the door. When other kids went in and out, she flinched every time it opened. Nyla was quiet for a moment. She set the book down carefully, keeping the spine pressed. "You noticed that," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I notice things. Most people don't." "I know," he said. He didn't say it with any pride. He said it like it was just a fact about him, like having a particular eye color. Nyla looked at him steadily. "She's fine. She's got a caseworker and a decent placement right now. I check." She paused. "The flinching is going to take longer than the placement to fix. That's just how it works." He nodded once, like that answer had settled something. "Why did you want to know?" Nyla asked. "I'm not sure," he said, which was the most honest thing Lucien Devereaux had said to anyone in approximately 6 years. He left before she could respond. She heard his footsteps down the corridor, then nothing. She picked up the book and went back to pressing the spine flat, and she thought about a man who noticed when frightened children flinched and then sought out a back room to ask about it. She thought about the cut on his jaw that had been healing but was still visible. She thought about the fact that in 4 days of coming to the library, he had not checked out a single book or printed a single page of research. She thought, whatever you are, Luke Delaney, you're not a shipping consultant. Then she thought, not my business. and she went back to work. The call came at 11:17 that night. Lucien was at his actual desk, in his actual office, in the building on Atlantic Avenue that was registered to a property management company that was registered to another company that eventually, if you followed the chain with enough patience and subpoenas, led back to a holding company in Delaware that had never done anything illegal in its existence because its existence was only on paper. He was reviewing the week's financials, which were not the kind of financials that got filed with the IRS, when his secure line rang. He picked up. "It's Remy." Remy Okafor was his head of intelligence, a 40-year-old man from Lagos who had spent 12 years in corporate cybersecurity before Lucien recruited him by the simple method of tripling his salary and offering him problems that were actually interesting. "We've got a flag." "What kind?" "External inquiry. Someone ran a private search on a civilian attached to your current pattern. Name is..." "Don't say it on this line." A pause. "Right. The woman from the Tuesday location." Lucien's hand tightened on the phone. "How long ago?" "Roughly 6 hours. The firm that ran it is Salter Information Group. They work for..." "I know who they work for." He was already thinking, already moving. "Who commissioned it?" "We're working backward through the transaction trail. It's going to take until morning." "Make it faster." "Lucien." "Faster, Remy." He hung up. Sat for a moment with his hand still resting on the phone. 6 hours. Someone had run a search on Nyla 6 hours ago, which meant someone had connected her to him, had been watching him closely enough to notice a woman he'd spoken to for less than 3 minutes on 4 separate afternoons. That level of surveillance meant either he was far less careful than he'd believed, or whoever was running this operation had resources significant enough to embarrass him. Neither option was acceptable. He pulled open his desk drawer and took out a photograph. Not of Nyla. He hadn't authorized that, and he wasn't going to. It was a photograph of 7 men taken at a restaurant in Providence 18 months ago, his inner circle. The 6 men who had complete access to his scheduling, his security patterns, his safe houses. He laid the photograph on the desk and looked at each face. His driver, Marco. His security chief, Price. His legal counsel, Harriet Bloom. His financial director, Costa. His operations manager, Sue Jin. And Vincent. One of them had known about the route the night of the attempt. One of them had shared his pattern to whoever was now running searches on civilians. He picked up the photograph and looked at Vincent Caldera's face for a long time. Vincent, who had been 3 minutes late to the post-incident debrief, who had expressed the correct amount of outrage and the correct amount of relief, and who had, notably, asked only practical questions and 0 personal ones. Lucien had filed that away and not acted on it because he didn't act on instinct alone. He acted on evidence. The search on Nyla might be the first piece. He put the photograph face down on the desk and picked up a different phone. Vincent got the information from Greg Salter at 7 the next morning, delivered to an encrypted messaging app that deleted itself after 30 seconds of reading. Nyla Vaughn, 34. Librarian, Boston Public Library System. Currently stationed at the Boylston branch. Master's degree in library science from Simmons University. Annual salary, $41,000. Second job, 3 evenings a week at a tutoring center in Jamaica Plain. Guardian of 1 minor, Micah Vaughn, age 16, sister's child, parents deceased. Current debt, $62,000 in student loans and credit. No assets beyond a 2009 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. Monthly shortfall between income and expenses, approximately $320, covered by irregular additional work and what appeared to be consistent, careful budgeting. Volunteer history extensive. Hospital reading programs, food pantry, youth literacy coalition, no criminal record, no legal issues, no hidden finances, no connections to any known organization, criminal or otherwise. Vincent read the report twice. Then he set down his coffee and thought carefully. He had expected, if he was being honest, to find something. Some angle, some leverage point, some small secret that would explain why Lucien Devereaux, a man who had not been observed expressing personal interest in another human being in at least a decade, was visiting a public library 4 days running to watch a librarian read picture books to children. Instead, he found this: a woman with more generosity than money and more patience than sense, who appeared to be genuinely, unremarkably, inconveniently good, which was, in its own way, more dangerous than anything else Vincent could have found. Because you could use a secret against someone. You could use fear or greed or shame. Those were levers. Those were tools. But a man who had been reached not by someone's weakness but by their goodness, that was a different problem entirely. That kind of reach went deep. That kind of reach didn't respond to conventional pressure. Vincent poured his coffee down the sink because it had gone cold, and he thought, so that's how we do this then. Not through her secrets, through her safety. Nyla was shelving this morning returns when Denise from the front desk appeared at the end of the row with the expression she got when something had happened, and she was deciding whether to tell Nyla about it. What? Nyla said without looking up. Your Tuesday regular asked about you. Nyla looked up. Which one? Tall, fancy coat, kind of intense looking, Luke something. She went back to shelving. What did he ask? He wanted to know what time you usually come in. Denise paused. I didn't tell him before you say anything. I said we don't give out staff schedules. Good. He said thank you and went to the archives. Denise was still hovering. Nyla. Denise. He's been here 5 days in a row. People research things. He hasn't printed anything. He hasn't checked out anything. He keeps ending up wherever you are. Nyla turned to face her. Denise was 52 years old and had worked in this library for 19 years and had very good instincts about people, which was both a professional asset and, in this moment, an inconvenience. I've noticed, Nyla said. And nothing. He's polite. He doesn't make me uncomfortable. She paused. He noticed Maya flinching at the door and came to ask if she was okay. Denise blinked. He noticed that? Apparently. A silence. Denise looked down the row toward the archives section, then back at Nyla. People who notice things like that are either very good or very dangerous. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Nyla said, and picked up the next book. He came in at 2 that afternoon and found her at the reference desk. She spoke first, which she hadn't planned to do, but the conversation she'd had with Denise had been sitting in her head all day like a piece of gravel in a shoe, not serious enough to stop for, too uncomfortable to ignore. Can I ask you something, Luke? He sat down in the chair across from the desk, uninvited but not presumptuous about it, like he was simply making himself available rather than assuming. What are you actually researching? She said. Because I've been a librarian for 9 years and shipping consultants come in here sometimes, and they pull records and they print things and they take notes. You haven't done any of that. He looked at her evenly. His face was, she had decided by now, very hard to read. Not in the way of coldness, but in the way of someone who had spent a very long time learning to keep the surface still. You're right, he said. I haven't. So what are you doing here? A pause. Not a long one. It's quiet, he said. I don't have a lot of places that are quiet. She studied him. That's not the whole answer. No, he agreed. It's not. Are you going to give me the whole answer? Not today, he said. Not because I'm hiding something that would put you in a bad position, because it's complicated, and I'd like to be sure about a few things first. She thought about that. She thought about Denise's words. Very good or very dangerous. And she thought about Maya flinching at the door and this man crossing a library to ask about it because he noticed, and it mattered to him. Okay, she said. He looked slightly surprised, like he'd expected more pushback. I'll know if you're lying, she added. I've been in this building long enough. People come in here when their lives fall apart and they don't know what else to do. I've gotten pretty good at reading the difference between someone who's hiding something harmful and someone who's just not ready to talk yet. Which am I? She met his eyes. I don't know yet. That's why I said okay. He almost smiled. It changed his face in a way that was startling, not because it made him look happier, but because it made him look human in a way he hadn't quite before. Fair enough, he said. He stayed for another hour, reading nothing, looking at nothing in particular, and for the first time since he'd started coming, Nyla didn't find it unsettling. She found it, against all reasonable judgment, something close to comfortable. She didn't know that was the most dangerous thing either of them had done yet. Remy called at 9:15 that evening while Lucien was driving. "Got the transaction trail. Tell me." The commission for the Salter search traces back through 2 shell accounts to a personal discretionary fund, unregistered. The account was opened 4 years ago and has been used 11 times. A pause. "Lucien, the opening signature matches Vincent Caldera." The car was very quiet. The city moved past the windows. "You're certain?" "I've run it 3 times." Lucien drove 2 more blocks before he said anything. "What else is attached to that account?" "That's what I need more time for. But here's what I can tell you tonight. 2 of the other 11 transactions were made in the weeks before the Atlantic Street incident. The one in March, where your car was redirected, and the one in September, the one where— I know which one. The September incident, where his secondary security detail had been given bad information about a route change and arrived 11 minutes after they should have. 11 minutes in which 4 things could have gone very wrong. 3 of them had. He had filed it as an intelligence failure, a communication error. He had reviewed it, corrected the protocol, moved forward. He had not looked for a source. "Pull everything on that account," he said. "Every transaction, every contact, every account it's touched. I want it all before morning." "That's a big ask before— Remy." "Yeah, okay." A pause. "Lucien, if this is what it looks like, I know what it looks like. He's been with you 7 years. I know. He's been in every room. I know." His voice was flat. "Which is why I need everything before morning. Because if it's what it looks like, then we're not working with a trader who saw an opportunity. We're working with someone who's been building toward this for at least 4 years. And that means every asset, every contact, every piece of infrastructure I have that Vincent has touched is compromised." The silence that followed had weight in it. "How many people is that?" Remy asked, though his voice said he already knew the answer. "Most of them," Lucien said. He ended the call. He drove another block. He pulled over on a side street and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. 4 years. If it had been 4 years, then Vincent had been planning this before the assassination attempt, before the surveillance, before any of the things Lucien had been treating as recent threats. The attempted killing on the night of the rain and the bus, and Nyla's sandwich. That wasn't the beginning. That was the part that had been meant to look like the beginning, to draw his attention to the wrong timeline. He had been looking at the wrong calendar for 3 weeks. He thought about the paper napkin in his interior pocket. He thought about Nyla sitting at the reference desk, calm and direct, saying, "I'll know if you're lying." He thought about the search that had already been run on her name, the fact that whoever had commissioned it now had her address, her schedule, her nephew's school. He thought, "I brought this to her door, not deliberately, not knowingly, but the road to where they were right now ran directly through a city bus in November, and through him being too obvious in a place he should have had better discipline about, and through the specific vulnerability of allowing himself, for the first time in 22 years, to want something simple. He had wanted the library, the quiet, the woman who read to frightened children and draped her cardigan over a sleeping girl and asked hard questions without cruelty and offered half her dinner to a stranger without needing to know why. He had wanted it badly enough to be careless. And Vincent, patient, calculating Vincent, who had spent 7 years studying Lucien the way a geologist studies fault lines, waiting for the exact pressure point, had seen it. Lucien started the car. He needed to get to her before Vincent made his next move. Not to confess, not yet. Just to pull her out of the crosshairs she didn't know she was standing in. He was halfway across the city before he acknowledged, fully and without excuse, that protecting her was not entirely about strategy. That was the problem. That was the crack in the wall. And somewhere on the other side of it, Vincent Caldera was already pressing his hands against the stone. Nyla got home at 10:30 that night to find Micah sitting on the front steps of the triple-decker in the November cold, which he only did when the apartment felt too small to hold whatever he was feeling. She sat down next to him without asking why he was outside. The concrete was cold through her coat. A cat crossed the street below them and disappeared under a parked car. "You okay?" she said. "I found a picture today," Micah said, "of my mom and you from before." He held his phone out. She took it. It was a photo she hadn't seen in a long time. Her and her sister Adaeze at what looked like a birthday party, maybe 15 years ago, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Adaeze was wearing a yellow dress. She looked healthy. She looked like she was going to be around forever. "Where'd you find it?" "In an email she forwarded me before she—" He stopped. "She forwarded it like a year before. I just found it." Neela held the phone a moment longer, then handed it back. She didn't say anything about Adaeze being in a better place or watching over them or any of the things people said that were meant to help and almost never did. She had learned that the things Micah needed were not the things that came with words. She put her arm around him. He was tall enough now that it was a little awkward. He leaned into it anyway. They sat like that for a while, in the cold, on the steps, and the city kept moving around them. Traffic and sirens, and the distant sound of music from somewhere down the block. And Nyla thought about how strange it was to love someone so much it felt like a physical thing, like something you carried in your body, like weight. She thought about all the ways she was trying to hold this together. The debt, the jobs, the shortfall every month, the trip to DC that Micah said didn't matter and absolutely did. She thought about a man with a cut on his jaw who came to the library and sat quietly and had not yet told her the truth about himself. She thought, something is coming. I don't know what it is, but something is coming. She didn't know how right she was. She would remember this moment later. The cold steps, Micah's shoulder against hers, the cat disappearing under the car. And she would think that it was the last truly quiet night before everything changed, and she hadn't known enough to hold on to it properly while she still could. The text came at 6:47 in the morning. Nyla was standing at the kitchen counter, still in her socks, waiting for the kettle because the coffee situation had finally been resolved. She'd bought a small bag of ground coffee 2 days ago, the store brand, the kind that tasted like ambition without follow-through, when her phone lit up on the counter with a number she didn't recognize. "Library closed today." "Don't go in. I'll explain." "Luke." She stared at it. Then she picked up her phone and called the number back. It rang once and went to a recording that said the number was not available for incoming calls, which was a thing she hadn't known phone numbers could do. She set the phone down, picked it up again, called the library's main line. Denise picked up on the second ring. "Boston Public, Boylston." "Denise, it's Nyla. Is everything— We're open, honey. What's wrong?" "Nothing," Nyla said. "I'll be in by 8. She hung up and looked at the text again. Library closed today. Don't go in. The library was not closed, which meant either the text was a mistake, a wrong number, a misunderstanding, or someone who knew her work schedule had sent her a message designed to keep her away from her routine on a specific morning, for a reason they hadn't explained. She thought about Luke Delaney, who was not a shipping consultant, who had never printed a single page of research, who had noticed a frightened child flinch at a door and cross the building to ask about it. She thought about the last thing she'd told him. "I'll know if you're lying." She got dressed, put on her coat, and went to work. Lucian found out she'd ignored the text at 8:13 when the man he'd positioned outside the library, a careful, quiet man named Torres, who looked like a graduate student and carried a coffee cup he never drank from, sent a 2-word message. "She's inside." He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stood up from the chair in Remy's office where he'd been sitting since 4 in the morning reviewing transaction records, and he put on his coat. "I have to go," he said. Remy looked up from 3 monitors. He had the specific appearance of a man who had not slept, which in Remy's case meant his tie was slightly loosened and there was a pen behind each ear. "The account trail isn't finished." "How much more time?" 2 hours. "Maybe 3. "Then it'll be here when I get back." He buttoned his coat. "What you have so far, give me the short version." Remy turned to face him fully. "The short version is that Vincent has been running a parallel financial operation for 4 years, skimming from port revenue, diverting contract payments, building a separate war chest. Current estimate is somewhere between 8 and 12 million. and he's been moving it to accounts connected to 3 of the Mafia captains in the New England network. Lucien processed this. Which 3? Ferraro, Bianchi, and Delacroix. 3 of the 7 captains. Not a majority, but enough if you moved at the right moment to create enough chaos to make a leadership transition look like a rescue rather than a coup. He's building a coalition, Lucien said. Has been, for a long time. Remy paused. The assassination attempt wasn't supposed to succeed, Lucien. I think it was a test. He needed to know how the captains would react if you disappeared, who would move toward him and who would hold. Lucien stood very still. He thought about that night. The rain, the bus, the sandwich. The decision to disappear into the city rather than go to a safe house. An instinct he hadn't been able to fully explain to himself at the time, only that the thought of being in a room full of people he'd trusted, while not yet knowing which of them had sold his route, had been physically intolerable. That instinct had kept him alive, and it had led him to a bus, and to a woman, and to 4 weeks of library afternoons that Vincent had apparently been watching closely enough to commission a background search. He's going to move soon, Lucien said. He's been patient for 4 years. He won't wait much longer. I agree. And he's already flagged her. Remy said nothing. That was its own kind of answer. Lucien walked to the door. Finish the trail. I want the complete account map and every name attached to it before noon. He stopped with his hand on the frame. And Remy, make sure Price knows to keep the security rotation random today. No patterns. Price is on the list of people who could have leaked your schedule. I know, Lucien said. That's why I'm telling you to tell him. If he's clean, it doesn't matter. If he's not, then he knows we're moving. That's a risk. Everything is a risk. He left. The children's reading hour started at 10. Nyla had 8 kids that morning, ranging from 4 to about 9 years old, 3 of whom she knew by name and had been coming every week for months, and 5 who were new or irregular, brought by parents or grandparents who sat in the chairs along the wall and held their coats in their laps and watched with the careful attention of people who understood that this hour was something their children needed and that they themselves couldn't provide it the same way. She was reading the 3rd book, a story about a bear who keeps trying to give away something he loves and keeps discovering that the people he offers it to already have exactly what they need, when she felt it. The particular quality of attention from the doorway. She didn't look up from the page. She kept her voice even, kept the story moving, used her left hand to demonstrate the bear's gesturing, used her right to slowly turn the book so the kids on that side of the circle could see the illustration. And with the peripheral vision she'd developed over 9 years of managing a room full of small children, she registered the shape in the doorway. Tall, dark coat. She finished the page. She turned to the next. She did not look up. When the story ended and she sent the children to the craft table with her volunteer assistant Priya, she stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the doorway. Luke, she was still thinking of him as Luke, because the alternative required information she didn't have yet, was leaning against the wall just outside the children's section. His arms were crossed. He looked like a man who had been awake for a long time and was running on something more durable than sleep. I texted you, he said. I saw. You came anyway. I work here. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw something move behind his eyes. Not quite frustration, more like the specific exhaustion of a person dealing with someone who keeps being exactly who they said they were. I need to talk to you, he said. Not here. Somewhere I can explain properly. You can explain here. Nyla. He said her name with a weight that made her go still. He'd called her Nyla before, but not like that. Not like it was something he'd been carrying around. Someone ran a background search on you 3 days ago. They have your address, your schedule, your nephew's school. The air in the corridor changed. She felt it. Who? She said. Someone connected to me. Someone I didn't... He stopped. I didn't bring this to you on purpose. I need you to know that. But the fact that I was here repeatedly, in the same place you work, was enough to flag you. And now there's someone who may see you as a way to get to me. She was quiet for a long moment. Around the corner, she could hear Priya explaining to the kids how to use the safety scissors. Small voices, the sound of paper. Who are you? Neela said. He held her gaze. I'll tell you everything. I promise. But right now, what matters is making sure you and your nephew are safe. Who are you? His jaw tightened. She watched him make a decision she could not see the shape of. My name is Lucien Devereaux, he said. She didn't know the name. She could see that he expected her to, and she didn't, and she watched something complicated cross his face, relief and disappointment at exactly the same time. Should I know that name? She said. Most people in this city would say yes. I'm not most people. Tell me why it matters. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the controlled surface slipped. Not completely, not even halfway, but enough that she could see the exhaustion underneath was not just physical. It was the exhaustion of a man who had been many things for a very long time and was no longer entirely sure which of those things was the real one. I run a criminal organization, he said. I have since I was 22. I inherited it and I built it, and for 22 years it has been the only thing I was. He paused. And I have an enemy inside it who has spent 4 years building toward a move against me, and that enemy now has your name and your nephew's school and your home address, and I don't have a way to undo that without telling you the truth. The children's voices from around the corner, Priya laughing at something, paper scissors cutting carefully along a line. Nyla looked at him for a long moment. She had spent 9 years reading people in this building, people at their worst and their most stripped down, people who came in because they had nowhere else to go, people who sat at the computers with their jaw tight and their hands shaking and pretended they were just checking email. She had learned the difference between a person who was lying and a person who had waited so long to tell the truth that the truth came out of them like something they'd been holding in a wound. This was the second thing. She didn't know what to do with it. She didn't know what to do with any of it. But she had never been a person who turned away from something complicated just because it was complicated. My nephew comes home at 3:15, she said, from school. He walks 3 blocks. Lucien nodded. I know. I have someone watching the school today. He won't be touched, but I need you to... Don't tell me what you need me to do. Her voice was quiet and absolutely level. Tell me what's happening, all of it, and then I'll decide what I do. They sat in the far corner of the reading room after hours, after Priya had taken the kids back to their parents, and the morning volunteers had gone home, and the library had moved into its quiet midday rhythm. Nyla had told Denise she needed the corner room for a patron consultation, which was technically not a lie. He told her as much as he could. Not everything. There were things it would not have been safe for her to know, not because he wanted to protect himself, but because information was its own form of exposure, and the less she carried, the cleaner her position stayed. He told her about the attempt on his life. He told her about the weeks in the city while he tried to identify the source. He told her about the parallel financial operation, the coalition of captains, the background search on her name. He did not tell her about the paper napkin in his coat pocket. That was not relevant to her safety, and it was not something he could explain without explaining everything else. She listened without interrupting. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her back straight, not rigid, not defensive, just the posture of a woman who was paying close attention and intended to keep doing so. When he finished, she said, "The person running the search. Do you know who it is?" "I have strong evidence pointing to one person. I'm waiting on confirmation." "And when you get confirmation, what happens to that person?" He looked at her. "What do you think happens?" She held his gaze. "I'm asking you." "He answers for what he's done," Lucien said. "Inside the organization, according to our rules. That means he doesn't survive it." "In most cases, yes." She nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when you're not agreeing but you're acknowledging that you've heard something true. "I'm not going to pretend I think that's okay," she said. "I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand that you exist in a world where the rules are different. Both things can be true." "They can," he said, and he sounded slightly surprised, like he'd been bracing for something else. "What I won't do," she said, "is let you manage this without telling me what's happening. You don't get to make decisions about my safety and my nephew's safety without me in the conversation. That's not a negotiation." "Understood. And if at any point I decide the safest thing for Micah is to take him and go somewhere else, then I'll make that happen," he said. No argument. She studied him. "You're very used to being the one who decides things." "Yes." "Is this difficult for you?" He thought about it honestly. "More than I expected," he said. Something shifted very slightly in her expression, not softness, more like the recognition of something real. "Okay," she said. "Then we start from there." The gala invitation arrived that afternoon, slipped under the library's administrative door in a thick cream envelope with gold embossing. The Children's Literacy Foundation of New England, annual fundraising gala, black tie, this Saturday. There was a handwritten note on the inside. "The library system has been allocated one representative spot. Please advise on attendance. C. Hargrove, Foundation Director." Nyla sat at her desk and looked at the invitation for a long time. The foundation was legitimate. She knew that. She'd interacted with their grant programs twice in the last 3 years, both times unsuccessfully, which made this allocation either a consolation gesture or something more complicated. She knew the gala would be full of the kind of people who could fund the library's children's programs for a decade if they felt like it. She knew the kind of borrowed dress courage it would take to walk into a room like that, representing the Boylston branch, which was not the flagship, was not the beautiful central location, was the branch in the neighborhood that the city's funding decisions treated as an afterthought. She also thought about Micah's Washington, D.C. trip, the $320 monthly shortfall, the archival adhesive she bought with her own money. She emailed back, "Nyla Vaughn will attend on behalf of the Boylston branch." What she did not know, sitting at her desk composing that email, was that the invitation had been sent to every branch in the library system. It was not an allocation, it was a mass mailing. And the foundation's donor list included 3 names that would have meant something to her if she'd known to look for them. 3 men whose financial commitments to the foundation were routed through holding companies that connected, eventually, and with patience, to the same parallel accounts that Remy Okafor was mapping in a building across the city. Vincent Caldera had learned something very important from 4 years of careful architecture. The most effective move was never a direct attack. It was a setting, a stage, a room full of witnesses who would see exactly what you needed them to see. He had sent the invitation himself through channels clean enough that they wouldn't trace. He had arranged for a specific woman, a socialite named Helena Marsh, whose reputation for cruelty in social settings was both genuine and useful, to attend and to be positioned at the right table. He hadn't told Helena what to do. He hadn't needed to. He'd only needed to make sure she knew who Nyla was, what she looked like, what she represented, and that the room would be full of people for whom appearances were a form of currency. Helena Marsh would do the rest naturally. And when the scene was complete, when Nyla Vaughn was publicly humiliated in front of Boston's entire philanthropic class, it would do one of 2 things. Either it would bring Lucien Devereaux out of whatever careful distance he'd been maintaining, which would give Vincent exactly the public confirmation he needed that Lucien had developed a personal vulnerability, or it would not bring him out, which would tell Vincent that the connection was weaker than he'd assessed, in which case he would move directly. Either outcome was useful. Vincent had always preferred situations with no bad results for him. What he had not fully calculated was that Nyla Vaughn was not a prop. She was a person, with her own history and her own specific kind of courage, built not from power or protection, but from 34 years of navigating a world that consistently underestimated her. And Lucien Devereaux, who had spent 2 decades building a life on calculation and control and never leaving anything to chance, had driven to the gala on Saturday evening not because he'd been invited, he hadn't been, formally, but because Remy had confirmed that morning that the invitation Nyla received was not what it appeared to be, and because Torres had called at 6 p.m. to say Nyla had left her apartment in a borrowed dress and shoes that weren't quite right for the weather, and because something in Lucien's chest had done something it had no business doing, and he had gotten in the car before he finished deciding to. He arrived late. He meant to. He needed to see the room first. The ballroom was in the Harrington Hotel on Commonwealth Avenue, which had the kind of interior that made you feel slightly underdressed, even when you were wearing something expensive. High ceilings, warm light, tables set with the particular precision that cost more per chair than Nyla made in a day. Lucien stood at the back of the room for 4 minutes before he found her. She was at a side table near the windows, alone, holding a glass of water she hadn't touched. Across from her sat Helena Marsh. He recognized her, had been in 3 rooms with her over the years, understood exactly what she was and what she was capable of in social settings. And 2 other women whose names he didn't immediately know, but whose body language told him everything about what had already happened. Helena was turned slightly away from Nyla in the specific manner of someone who has made their point and is now simply underscoring it with absence. The 2 other women were watching Nyla with the politely appalled expression of people who were deciding whether to laugh or pretend they hadn't noticed. Nyla was looking at the table. Her hands were in her lap. Her back was straight. She was doing what she always did, holding herself completely still, not giving them anything. He started walking. He heard, as he crossed the room, the crowd parting the way crowds do when they recognize someone, which meant the night had just changed shape in a way no one at that table yet understood. Helena Marsh say to the woman beside her, loud enough to be carrying, "I'm just saying there are standards for events like this. You can't simply send anyone." He reached the table before she finished the sentence. The room, in that specific radius, went quiet. He looked at Helena Marsh for exactly 2 seconds. He had removed more dangerous people from more significant positions using fewer words, and she knew it. He could see the knowledge land on her face, watch the color change. Then he turned. He turned away from Helena Marsh as if she had not spoken, as if she were a piece of furniture that had briefly been in his line of sight. He turned to Nyla. She was looking up at him. Her expression was not relief. It was not embarrassment. It was the careful, watchful expression of a woman trying to understand what was happening and whether she needed to be angry about it. He sat down in the empty chair beside her, not across, beside. He kept his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry past their table. "Are you all right?" he said. "I was handling it," she said, quietly, evenly. "I know you were." "Then why?" "Because I needed to be here," he said. "For me, not for you. You were fine. I needed to be here." She looked at him. The wariness was still there, but something else was there too, something she hadn't decided what to call yet. "Helena Marsh," he said, still quietly. "How long has she been?" "About 10 minutes. Nyla set her water glass down with a small, careful click. She made a comment about the dress, then one about the library branch. Then she said something about the caliber of representatives being invited these days. She paused. She said it like I wasn't sitting right there, like I was already not in the room. He looked at Nyla's face, at the particular kind of tiredness in it that had nothing to do with the hour. "That's happened to you before," he said. It was not a question. "More times than I could count," she said. "That part doesn't—" She stopped. "I'm fine. What are you doing here, Lucien?" It was the first time she'd said his actual name. He registered it the way you register something that changes the temperature of a room. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "about tonight. About why you were invited." He paused. "Not here, but soon. Tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. "How bad is it?" "It's not dangerous," he said carefully. "It's a manipulation. Someone used this event to create a scene they could observe. You were the instrument." He watched her process that. "It wasn't about you. You were chosen because of me." She was quiet. He watched her work through it, the anger that moved across her face and then settled into something colder and more controlled. "Someone set this up," she said, "to watch how you'd react." "Yes." "And you came anyway." "Yes." She looked at him. "So you showed them exactly what they wanted to see." He held her gaze. "I know." "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. He reached into the interior pocket of his coat, the same pocket where the folded napkin had been for 4 weeks, and he set it on the table between them. A paper napkin, printed with small blue diamonds, folded twice, creased from being carried. Nyla looked at it. Her breath changed. "I've been trying to understand why I kept that," he said. "For 4 weeks. I've had a lot of theories." He paused. "The most honest one is that it was the first thing someone gave me in 22 years that had no calculation in it, no angle, no price." He paused again. "And I think I came tonight because having something like that, having someone like that, And then standing back while someone used it as a weapon is something I'm not capable of, even when I know it's the wrong tactical decision. He looked at her. Even when I know exactly what it costs. The room around them was a different kind of quiet now, not the hostile quiet from before. The room had been watching the table since he sat down, and whatever they were reading in it, the napkin, his posture, the low-voiced conversation between a man the city feared and a woman the socialite table had been trying to make invisible, but the room had made some decision about it. Lucien could feel the temperature shifting. What he couldn't feel yet, because he was looking at Nyla, was that Vincent Caldera was not in the room. He had not come to watch in person. He had sent someone to report back. And what that person was sending back to Vincent right now, from a phone in the corridor outside the ballroom, was not the image of Nyla Vaughn being publicly humiliated while Lucy stayed away. It was the image of Lucienne Devereaux sitting beside her, handing her something careful and private while the room watched. Vincent received the update at 9:42. He read it twice. He set his phone face down on his desk and looked at the ceiling of his home office for a long moment. Then he picked up a different phone, a burner, one of 6 he rotated, and made a call. "Move the timeline," he said when the line connected. "We're not waiting for the financial close. We move Thursday." A pause. "And take the boy." He ended the call. He put the burner in his jacket pocket. The boy was leverage. The boy was the one thing that would force Lucien to choose between defending his empire and protecting something he'd only just allowed himself to care about. Vincent knew, with the certainty of 7 years of watching this man operate, that Lucien could hold the empire with one hand and a clear head. What he couldn't do, what no one could do, was hold an empire with one hand and a breaking heart with the other. Thursday morning. Micah Vaughn would not make it to school, and Lucienne Devereaux would have to decide for the first time in his life what he was actually willing to lose. In the ballroom, Nyla picked up the folded napkin with 2 fingers, turned it over once, and set it back down. She looked at him. Her expression was the most complex thing he'd seen on a human face in a very long time. Anger and recognition and grief and something she wasn't ready to name and something she was. "You need to tell me everything," she said. "Not some of it. Not the version that protects me from being scared. Everything." She picked up the napkin and held it. "Because whatever this is, whatever we're in, I'm not going to navigate it blind. That's not who I am." "I know," he said. "Then talk." He did. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet office with a burner phone going cold in his jacket pocket, Vincent Caldera poured himself a drink and waited for Thursday with the patience of a man who had been waiting for 4 years and was finally almost done. Wednesday night, Lucien didn't sleep. He sat at the long table in Remy's operations room and went through the complete account map line by line, and every time he reached the end, he started over, looking for the thing he'd missed, the angle he hadn't considered, the thread that would unravel the architecture Vincent had spent 4 years building. The room smelled like cold coffee and printer toner. At 2 in the morning, Remy fell asleep in his chair with his glasses still on and his hand resting on a stack of transaction printouts. Lucien let him sleep. He kept reading. By 4 a.m., he had a complete picture. It was worse than he'd thought and cleaner than he'd feared, which was its own specific kind of problem. Worse, because the coalition was solid. Ferraro, Bianchi, and Delacroix had each received enough money over 4 years that their commitment to Vincent's move was financial as much as political, which meant they weren't going to walk it back out of loyalty or hesitation. Cleaner because Vincent had been careful, meticulous, had left almost no operational fingerprints, which meant the case Lucien could make to the remaining 4 captains was strong in evidence but thin in the kind of visceral proof that moved men who operated on instinct and reputation. He needed Vincent to act first. He had been counting on that. He had been positioning for it since the gala, since the moment he understood that Vincent had moved the timeline. Let him move. Let him show his hand completely, then dismantle it. What he had not accounted for, what he could not have fully accounted for, was the phone call that came at 5:47 Thursday morning. He picked up before the second ring. It's Torres. Torres's voice had a quality Lucien had never heard in it before, something compressed and tight. Lucien, the boy didn't make it to the bus. The room went very still. Lucien's hand tightened on the phone. Say that again. Micah Vaughn. He left the apartment at 7:20 for the 7:40 bus. He didn't reach the stop. I was positioned at the library end, not the apartment end. I was covering the wrong point. Torres's voice broke slightly on the last sentence, then steadied. I'm sorry, I should have... How long ago? 12 minutes. Torres. His voice was very flat. Get eyes on the apartment. Make sure she's inside. Don't let her leave without coverage. He ended the call. He stood up. Remy woke at the sound of Lucien's chair scraping back, looked up with the disorientation of interrupted sleep, and then saw Lucien's face and was immediately, completely awake. What happened? They took Micah. Remy was on his feet before the sentence finished. When? 12 minutes ago. 3 blocks from the apartment. He was already moving toward the secure phone on the wall. Get me everything we have on Vincent's operational properties. Warehouses, properties registered to shell companies, anywhere in the network that has enough space and enough isolation to hold someone without drawing attention. He picked up the phone. And get me price. Lucien, price might be. I know what price might be. Get him anyway. I want to watch his face when I tell him. Nyla found out at 6:03. She had been in the kitchen making Micah's lunch. She always made it the night before, but she'd fallen asleep on the couch at 11 with a book on her chest and hadn't done it. So she was making it this morning, and she was thinking about the conversation she'd had with Lucien at the gala, going through it for the 4th or 5th time, the way you go through something that changes the shape of what you thought you understood. When her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. Ms. Vaughn, a man's voice, smooth, careful, the voice of someone who had practiced delivering bad news in a way that maintained control of the conversation. My name isn't important. What's important is that your nephew is safe. He'll stay safe, as long as certain conditions are met. She put her hand flat on the counter. Where is he? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Safe. As I said. Put him on the phone. A pause. Then distantly, Micah's voice, tight, trying not to sound scared and not quite succeeding. Aunt Nyla, I'm okay. The sound cut off. As you can hear, the man said, he's fine. He'll remain so. The conditions are simple. You need to reach Lucien Devereaux and tell him that he has until noon to contact us directly. The number will be sent to your phone in 1 minute. If he doesn't call by noon, we move to the next stage. What's the next stage? Let's hope we don't find out. The line went dead. She stood in the kitchen for 4 seconds. Her hand was still flat on the counter. The lunch she'd been making, turkey sandwich, whole wheat bread, a little mustard, was in front of her half assembled. She picked up her phone and called Lucien. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said. I already know. Nyla, you knew this was going to happen. Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. You told me Thursday. You told me they'd move Thursday. You said you'd have coverage on him. I had coverage. It wasn't positioned correctly. That's on me. He paused. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. You don't get to tell me to listen. The steadiness in her voice cracked slightly and she let it. That is my nephew. That is Adaize's son. He is 16 years old and he is scared. I heard it in his voice. And you... She stopped. She put her hand over her mouth for a moment. She took a breath. Tell me what's happening right now. All of it. I'm going to get him back, Lucien said. That is not a promise I'm making to manage you. It's a fact. I need you to stay in your apartment with Torres outside until I call you. I'm not... Nyla. His voice dropped, raw in a way she hadn't heard before. I need you to be somewhere I know you're safe because I cannot do what I have to do if I'm worried about where you are. That is the honest truth. Please. She stood in the kitchen with the half-made sandwich in front of her and she thought about Micah's voice on the phone. I'm okay. And she thought about the last time someone had taken something from her that she couldn't afford to lose, which was a diese, which was not something she could think about right now. "You have until noon," she said. "That's what they told me. Call them by noon or they move to the next stage." "I won't need until noon." "Lucien, stay with Torres. I'll call you the moment I have him." He ended the call. She set her phone down on the counter. She looked at the sandwich. She wrapped it up carefully, the way she always did, and put it in the refrigerator because she could not stand to waste food, even now, even this morning. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat on the surface and breathed until the shaking in her chest settled into something she could work with. Price was not the leak. Lucien could see it the moment Price walked into the operations room and Remy told him what had happened. His reaction was specific, not performed outrage, not carefully calibrated concern, but the particular physical response of a man whose professional identity is protecting people learning that something was taken on his watch. He went pale across the nose and cheekbones. His hands went still at his sides. "Give me what you have," Price said. "Everything." "Sit down first." Lucien studied him. "Where were you this morning between 5 and 6? Price looked at him. "You think I—" "Answer the question." "My apartment. Alone. I can't prove it." He held Lucien's gaze. "I know how that sounds. I also know that I've been with you for 11 years, and I need you to tell me right now if you think I'm capable of this, because if you do, we've got a bigger problem than I thought." Lucien held the eye contact for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "Sit down," he said. "I need your read on 3 properties." Price sat. They spread the map across the table. The message with the contact number came through to Nyla's phone at 6:15, exactly as promised. She forwarded it to Lucien without responding to it. He called her 30 seconds later. "Don't contact that number," he said. "For any reason." "I wasn't going to." "I know, I just needed to say it." A pause. "We've narrowed it to 2 locations. Port facility in Charlestown or a warehouse in South Boston registered to a food distribution company that stopped operating 2 years ago. We're running eyes on both right now." "How long?" "Less than an hour, maybe 30 minutes. She did the math. It was 6:22 a.m. Noon was 5 hours and 38 minutes away. She did not ask what happened if the noon deadline passed because she understood that the noon deadline was not the real structure of this situation. The real structure was that Vincent Caldera wanted Lucien to make a choice, not to actually negotiate. There was no version of this where Lucien called that number and Micah came home safely because Vincent agreed to reasonable terms. She understood that. She understood it more clearly than she wanted to. "Lucien," she said. "Yeah. Don't let it matter that I'm involved in your decision-making. Don't make a different choice than you'd make if Micah were anyone else's nephew." A silence. "That's not possible," he said. "Make it possible. Because if you make a bad tactical choice because of me and something happens to him because of that, I will not—" She stopped. "Just make the right choice. For him. Not for me." Another silence. Longer. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Torres called it at 6:51. South Boston. The food distribution warehouse on Preble Street. 2 vehicles registered to a shell company parked outside. Movement on the 2nd floor visible through a clouded window. At least 3 people, possibly more, and 1 figure smaller than the others, seated, not moving. Lucien had 11 men positioned within 6 blocks by the time Torres finished the sentence. He looked at Price across the map table. "What do we need?" 2 entry points. Loading dock in the back, side door on the Preble Street face. "Anything above us?" "Building next door is 4 stories. We can get 2 people on the roof with sightlines to both exits." "How many inside estimate?" Remy had the satellite image up on the screen. "The vehicles account for maybe 6, but Vincent would have staged more inside, given that this is the operational center of a leverage move. I'd plan for 10 to 15. "Lucien," Price was looking at him directly. "If Vincent's in there, he won't be." Lucien pulled on his jacket. "He doesn't get his hands dirty on the operational side. Not this phase. He'll be somewhere clean, waiting for the phone call." "So who's running it inside?" "Someone who answers to him but isn't traceable to him directly. Probably outsourced. Hired crew rather than organization soldiers, because organization soldiers know who I am, and most of them aren't going to hold a 16-year-old for leverage with a clear conscience. He checked the secondary phone in his inside pocket. We go in clean. No escalation unless they start it. The objective is Micah out. Everything else is secondary. And if they start it, Price said. Lucien picked up his coat. Then we finish it. The warehouse smelled like old grain and rust and the particular cold of a building that hasn't been heated in 2 years. Micah knew this because he could see his own breath. He could see it in the thin gray light coming through the second-floor windows, which were filmed with something. Condensation, old paint, he couldn't tell, that turned the outside world into a blur. He was zip-tied to a metal chair. His wrists hurt. His left shoulder hurt more, from when he'd struggled when they grabbed him, and one of them had pulled his arm back at an angle that made something pop and didn't unpop when they let go. There were 4 men in the room, 2 by the door, 1 by the window, one sitting in a folding chair doing something on his phone and not paying much attention to Micah, which Micah had decided was either a good sign or a very bad one, and he couldn't figure out which. He was trying not to think about his aunt. He was trying not to think about the last thing she'd said to him that morning, which was, "I'll be home by 6, there's pasta in the fridge, don't eat it all before I get back." Ordinary, tired, the kind of sentence that was only remarkable because of what came after it. He was thinking about it anyway. He had not cried. He was choosing to be specific about this in his own mind. He had not cried. Not when they grabbed him, not in the car, not here. He had been scared in a way that felt different from every other kind of scared he'd experienced. A cold, full-body scared that sat in his stomach like something swallowed wrong. But he had not cried. His mother had told him once, this was before she got sick, when he was maybe 12, and she'd said it in the context of something small that he couldn't remember now, but the sentence had stayed. She'd said, "Baby, fear is information. It's not a stop sign. Use it." He was trying to use it. He was trying to inventory the room, the exits, the men, the sounds coming from below, the frequency of the phone checker's attention cycles. He was trying to think, because thinking was the thing he was capable of doing right now, and he was going to do it. The phone checker looked up, made eye contact with Micah, looked away. Micah counted the seconds until he looked up again. 17. Lucien came through the loading dock. Not first. Price went first with 2 men, and 2 more took the side entrance, and the 2 on the roof had eyes on every exit before anyone moved. It was choreography built on the specific mathematics of violence that Lucien had spent 22 years learning, and had executed in the first 45 seconds with the kind of precision that made him, briefly, able to set aside the fact that this was not a business operation. This was a 16-year-old boy who'd been awake for 3 hours in a cold building with his shoulder pulled out. The ground floor was clear. 4 men, 2 entry teams, 22 seconds. The stairs were the problem. 1 man positioned at the top, and the stairs were open metal, industrial, every footstep audible from 15 feet. Lucien looked at Price. Price looked at the stairs. They had maybe 4 seconds of quiet before the man at the top heard something. Lucien went first, fast and close to the wall, where the steps were bolted directly to the frame and flexed less. 3 steps. 4. The man at the top started to turn. Price was faster. The confrontation on the stairs lasted 6 seconds and ended against the wall with no shots fired, which was exactly how Lucien needed it. Sound carried in an empty warehouse. He needed the second floor to stay uncertain for another 30 seconds. He got 20. The door at the top of the stairs opened before he reached it, and the 2 men who came through it were professionals. Not Lucien's organization, hired the way Vincent had hired everything for this operation, through 2 intermediary layers that would take days to untangle. They were professionals, and they were fast, and the next 40 seconds were not choreography. They were the ugly, brutal, improvised mathematics of close quarters and bad angles, and the specific problem of needing to be fast enough to end it before someone in the room beyond made a decision about the boy in the chair. Lucien took a hit across the left side, elbow, hard, into his ribs, the kind of impact that sent white light across his vision and would become very painful as soon as he had time to notice it. He did not have time to notice it. He put the man into the wall with enough force that the metal partition rang like a bell, and he kept moving. The second man went down to Price with an efficiency that Lucian registered as peripheral data and didn't stop to evaluate. He pushed through the door. 4 men. 1 boy in a chair. 2 of the 4 men made the right decision. Hands up, backs to the wall, weapons set down on the floor, with the deliberate care of men who understood the situation had changed completely. 1 made the wrong decision and moved toward the chair, and Torres, coming through the window on a line from the adjacent building, put him down before he reached it. The 4th man ran for the far exit. Lucian let him go. He was already moving toward the chair. Micah looked up at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry. His shoulder was visibly off, sitting wrong in a way that made Lucian's chest do something complicated. But his eyes were clear, scared and clear and thinking. Lucian crouched in front of him. He kept his voice even. "I'm going to cut those now. Micah, look at me." Micah looked at him. "You're Luke," he said. "From the library." "Yes. My aunt called you Lucien." "That's my name." Micah processed this for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "Is she okay?" "She's safe. She's waiting for you." "Her phone? I'll get you to her in 20 minutes." He cut the zip ties. Micah's hands came free and he immediately reached for his shoulder with the opposite hand, jaw tightening. "Your shoulder is dislocated. Don't move it. We're going to a medical contact first." "I don't need to—" "You do." Lucien stood. He looked at Price, who was already on the phone, already coordinating the perimeter. Then he looked back at Micah. "Can you stand?" Micah stood. He swayed once, caught himself, stood straight. He was taller than Lucien had fully registered, seeing him only briefly before from a distance. He had his aunt's posture, the same refusal to make himself small even when everything was asking him to. "Yeah," Micah said. "I can stand." "Good." Lucien put his hand briefly on the boy's uninjured shoulder. Not a grip, just a point of contact, a steadying thing. "Let's go." They were 6 blocks from the warehouse when Remy called. Lucien had Micah in the back seat beside him, Price driving, Torres running counter-surveillance 2 cars back. Micah was leaning slightly forward, holding his shoulder still with his opposite hand, doing the specific breathing of someone managing pain without complaining about it. Lucien picked up. "Vincent is moving." Remy's voice was tight. "He's called an emergency captain's meeting, all 7, 2 hours from now, the Providence location. He doesn't know we have the boy yet." "Apparently not. Or he doesn't care. Either way, Lucien, if he gets all 7 captains in a room and presents the financial case before you get there, before the 3 compromised ones see that the leverage is gone, he could take a vote." Lucien's voice was flat. "With Ferraro, Bianchi, and Delacroix already bought, he only needs 1 more. Harmon has been receiving payments too. We found it in the 4th pass of the account map. He's not committed, the amount is too small for commitment, but he's compromised enough to be pressured." 4 of 7. If Vincent walked into that room with 4 captains already in his pocket and a narrative about leadership failure and a leverage play that he believed was still intact, he could take the vote before the remaining 3 understood what was happening. And a captain's vote, in the organization Lucien had built, was a structural mechanism he had not overridden in 11 years. It was the one thing he had consistently honored because it was the one thing that made the difference between an empire and a dictatorship. He had built it as a protection. It had become a vulnerability. "How long to Providence?" Lucien said. "Hour 40. Maybe an hour 15 if Price drives the way he drives." Price, who had heard this, said nothing, but the car accelerated. "Call Remy back when we know the medical situation," Lucien told Price. He lowered the phone. He looked at Micah, who was watching him with the direct, evaluating attention that Lucien was beginning to recognize as a family trait. "You're going somewhere after you drop me," Micah said. It was not a question. "Yes. To deal with whoever did this." Lucien looked at him. "Yes." Micah nodded. He turned to look out the window. After a moment he said quietly, mostly to the glass, "My mom used to say that the thing about justice is that somebody always has to go get it. It doesn't come to you." Lucien didn't say anything. He looked at the back of Micah's head, at the posture. Straight, held, refusing to fold. And he thought about Adaiz Vaughn, whom he had never met, whose son was sitting 3 inches from him, with a dislocated shoulder and dry eyes and his mother's words in his mouth. He thought about all the ways the world kept asking certain people to hold more than they should have to hold. He thought about what he owed. Not to Nyla specifically, not as a transaction, but what he owed to the understanding that had been building in him for 4 weeks in a library. The specific education of sitting in a quiet building and watching someone spend their days making the world fractionally less terrible, and understanding that he had spent 22 years doing the opposite. The car moved through the city. The morning was gray and cold, and Boston looked like itself, hard and beautiful and indifferent in the way of very old places. At the medical contact's location, Micah's shoulder was reset in a procedure that lasted 4 minutes and was, by any measure, one of the more painful 4 minutes of his life. He did not make a sound. He sat on the table with his jaw locked and his hands gripping the edge, and he did not make a sound. And when it was over, he breathed out once, sharp, through his nose, and said, "Okay, that's done." Lucian's phone showed 8:47 a.m. He called Nyla. She picked up before it rang. Her voice was one word: Micah. "He's here. He's okay. Shoulder's been reset. Put him on." He handed the phone to Micah, who took it and turned away slightly, the way you do when you need a moment that isn't public. Lucian stepped to the other side of the room and looked at the wall and listened to Micah say, I'm okay, I'm fine, Aunt Nyla." I promise, in the voice of a 16-year-old boy who was finally allowed to not be fine, and the measured steadiness in it, the way he held himself together even now, even for her, made something in Lucian's chest tighten so hard it was almost physical. Micah turned back and held the phone out. "She wants to talk to you." Lucian took it. "He's safe." "I know." Her voice was steady, different from the steadiness that had been managing fear. This was real. "What happens now?" "I have somewhere to be. Remy will bring Micah to you. Torres will stay outside until Lucien." She stopped him. "Come back." He was quiet for a moment. "I intend to." "That's not what I said. I said come back, to me. When this is over." A pause. "That's a different sentence." He stood in the medical office with Price by the door and Micah sitting on the exam table, carefully rotating his newly reset shoulder, and the weight of 22 years of choices pressing against the back of his sternum. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He ended the call. He handed the phone back to Micah. He looked at Price. "Providence," he said. Price nodded once. They moved. The drive was an hour and 9 minutes. Lucien spent most of it on the phone. 3 calls to the 4 captains he believed were still loyal, carefully worded, enough information to create doubt about the meeting's legitimacy, without revealing the complete picture, because revealing the complete picture required him to be in the room. Then a call to Remy, walking through the financial evidence one more time, making sure every document was accessible and transmittable and ready. Then one call to a number he had not dialed in 6 years. A federal contact. A prosecutor whose name would mean something in a room full of men deciding whether their next 7 years would be spent inside a building they couldn't leave. He didn't make any promises on that call. He only established that the conversation had happened. That was enough. 30 minutes out from Providence, his ribs started to genuinely hurt. The blow from the warehouse, the elbow, hard, into his left side, had either cracked something or bruised it deeply enough to feel like a crack. And every breath was a specific reminder that he was 51 years old and had not been in physical contact like that in 3 years, and his body had opinions about it. He did not tell Price. He shifted his position in the seat and breathed shallowly and looked at the highway and thought about what he was walking into. 7 captains. A room he hadn't been invited to. A man who had been planning this for 4 years and believed he still held the winning hand. $12 million in documented financial evidence, and a leverage play that had just been dismantled 45 minutes ago in a South Boston warehouse, and a vote that could go 4-3 against him if he didn't handle the next 20 minutes exactly right. He thought about what Nyla had said. Don't make a different choice than you'd make if Micah were anyone else's nephew. He thought about the choice he was about to make. It was not the choice that maintained the empire. It was not the choice that protected his position or his financial interest or his freedom of operation. It was the choice that was right, which was a thing he had not consistently organized his decisions around since he was approximately 19 years old, and the unfamiliarity of it sat in him like something new, something that didn't quite fit yet, but that he intended to keep wearing until it did. The Providence facility came into view. A converted industrial building, 3 stories, the kind of nondescript exterior that was its own kind of camouflage. 2 vehicles in the lot that he recognized and 3 that he didn't. The meeting had started. Price pulled up and stopped, looked at him. "You sure about this?" Price said. "Which part?" "Any of it." Lucien opened the car door. The cold air hit him, and his ribs announced themselves clearly, and he breathed through it. "No," he said honestly. "Let's go." He walked toward the building with Price behind him and the financial documents on the secure tablet under his arm and 22 years of an empire at his back, and he thought, this is what it costs. This is the price of the napkin and the quiet library and the woman who said, "Come back," like it was a complete sentence. Let's find out if I can pay it. He pushed through the door. The room went completely silent. Vincent Caldera, standing at the head of the table, with 7 captains seated around it and 3 years of patient architecture balanced on this exact moment, looked at Lucien Devereaux walk through the door he hadn't been invited through, and for the first time in 4 years of careful planning, something moved behind his eyes that was not patience. It was fear. The room held its breath. 7 captains around a long table, and Vincent Caldera at the head of it, and Lucien Devereaux standing in the doorway with cracked ribs and a tablet under his arm and Price behind him, and for 4 full seconds, nobody moved. The heating system in the building made a low mechanical sound. Someone's coffee cup sat steaming at the edge of the table. Small details that Lucien registered the way he always registered everything, completely, automatically, without deciding to. Vincent recovered first. That was the thing about Vincent. He was fast, not physically, but in the mind, in the recalibration, in the way he could absorb an unexpected variable and reorganize around it before most people had finished being surprised. Lucien had always known this about him, had considered it an asset for 7 years. "Lucien." His voice was measured, warm, even, the voice of a man welcoming an unannounced guest to a party that was always meant for him. "We were just discussing some concerns that needed—" "Sit down, Vincent." The warmth evaporated. Not dramatically, just a degree at a time, like a room losing heat through a cracked window. "This is a captain's meeting," Vincent said. "You weren't—" "Sit down." Vincent sat. Not because the words compelled him, he was past the point of compulsion, but because he was reading the room the same way Lucien was, and what he was reading told him that the next 60 seconds required patience more than posture. Lucien walked to the table. He set the tablet down at the center and turned it so the screen faced the captains on both sides. He did not sit. He stood at the table's midpoint, not at the head, not at Vincent's end, at the middle, and he looked at each man in turn. Ferraro, 61, Boston, 20 years in the organization. Bianchi, 57, Providence, 16 years. Delacroix, 53, Hartford, 12 years. These 3 he looked at last and longest, long enough that each one of them understood without being told that he knew. That specific understanding moved across their faces in sequence like a slow wave. Then he looked at the remaining 4. Harmon, who was compromised but not committed, and the 3 he believed were still clean, Reyes, Park, and Vasquez. "I'm going to tell you what happened this morning," Lucien said, "and then I'm going to show you something, and then each of you is going to make a decision. I'm not going to tell you what decision to make. I'm going to give you what I have and let you think." He pulled up the first document on the tablet. The account map. 4 years of transactions, clean lines connecting Vincent's discretionary fund to the 3 captains' shell accounts, dollar amounts, dates, the September incident prepayment, the March incident prepayment, the assassination attempt the night of the rain. He talked for 11 minutes. He didn't use notes. He laid it out the way he had laid out every major operational briefing for 22 years, sequentially, specifically, without editorializing, because the facts were sufficient, and adding emotion to facts was how you gave people permission to dismiss them. When he finished, the room was a different temperature than when he'd started. Ferraro looked at his hands, Bianchi had gone a specific shade that Lucien associated with men calculating whether they were looking at prison or something worse. Delacroix was very still. Harmon was looking at Vincent. Vincent had not moved. His hands were flat on the table. His face had done the thing it sometimes did under real pressure, gone slightly blank, the expressions turning off one by one like lights in a building. Lucien had seen it twice before in 7 years. Both times had preceded a very fast decision. "This is fabricated," Vincent said. His voice was calm. That was the impressive part, how calm it was. "The account structures are real, but the transaction origins have been manipulated. Anyone with access to our financial architecture could build this narrative." "That's possible," Lucien said, "which is why I spent 4 hours this morning with a federal prosecutor's office verifying the chain of custody on the documents." He paused. "They have copies, independently obtained through a separate investigative thread that's been running for 8 months. The thread was initiated by a currency reporting irregularity. It had nothing to do with me." That landed. He watched it land on each face around the table. "You went to a federal," Vincent started. "I didn't give them anything they didn't already have. I gave them context." Lucien looked at him directly. "I also told them about this morning. About the warehouse in South Boston. About a 16-year-old boy who spent 3 hours zip-tied to a chair with a dislocated shoulder." He kept his voice flat. Not for emotional effect, because flat was worse, because flat said this is just a fact among facts. "The boy is home now. He's safe. The operation you commissioned is fully documented through the same men who ran it, 2 of whom are currently cooperating with Price." The room absorbed this. Reyes, who had been quiet through the entire presentation, a small, precise man from New Haven who had run the Connecticut operations for 9 years with the clean efficiency of someone who did not like complications, said, "Vincent, did you order the boy taken?" Vincent looked at Reyes. The situation required, "Did you order it, yes or no?" A pause that lasted 3 seconds and answered the question without a word. Reyes nodded once. He looked at Lucien, then he looked down at the table, and he didn't look at Vincent again. Park and Vasquez exchanged a glance across the table. Vasquez put his hands in his lap, which was the specific gesture of a man removing himself from a situation. Park looked at the tablet screen, then away, then at a point on the far wall that had nothing on it. Harmon said nothing. He was looking at Ferraro. Ferraro, who had been in the organization the longest, who had known Lucien since Lucien was 22 years old and inheriting something he'd barely understood the scope of, looked up from his hands. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision that cost him something and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I received money," Ferraro said. He said it to the table, not to anyone specific. "Over 18 months, 7 payments. I want that acknowledged before anything else. I received it, and I didn't return it, and I knew where it came from." He paused. "I didn't sanction the boy. That wasn't... I was told it wouldn't reach civilians." "You were told wrong," Lucien said. "I know that now." Ferraro's jaw tightened. "For what it's worth." "It's worth something," Lucien said. "Not everything, but something." Bianchi and Delacroix had the specific paralysis of men waiting to see which direction the current moved before they committed to swimming. Lucien had known men like them his entire career, not true believers in any direction, but situational, which meant they could be addressed situationally. "The federal situation," he said, looking at them directly, "is going to resolve in one of 2 ways. The first way is that the investigation proceeds on its current track and takes 8 to 14 months to reach indictments, during which time business continues, and we address the internal issues through our own processes." He paused. "The second way is that additional cooperation accelerates the process and narrows its scope significantly." He let that sit. "I'm not making threats. I'm describing mathematics." Bianchi looked at Delacroix. Delacroix looked at the tablet. Neither of them looked at Vincent. Vincent understood what was happening. Lucien could see it. The moment the understanding arrived, the specific recalibration, the lightning-fast assessment of remaining options. He had 2. He could fight, here, now, with words and whatever political capital he'd built, knowing that the three committed captains were already showing fracture lines that wouldn't hold under pressure. Or he could... "I want a lawyer present," Vincent said. The room shifted. "This isn't that kind of meeting," Lucien said. "Then what kind of meeting is it?" Vincent's voice had changed, still controlled, but the warmth was entirely gone now, and underneath it was something that Lucien recognized because he'd heard it in his own voice at certain critical moments over 22 years. It was the voice of a man who had run out of plays and knew it and was deciding how to face that. "What happens now, Lucien? In your organization, in your empire, to the man who spent 7 years building it with you and decided one day that the math didn't work in his favor anymore. What does justice look like in the room we're sitting in right now?" Lucien was quiet for a moment. His ribs hurt. He was aware of it the way you become aware of something you've been managing when the thing requiring your management reaches a pause. "Honest answer," he said. "For once," Vincent said, "yes." "A month ago, the answer would have been different," Lucien said. "You know what it would have been. Everybody in this room knows what it would have been." Vincent held his gaze. "And now?" Lucien looked at him. 7 years. The man had sat in his office and his car and his conference rooms and his private dinners for 7 years, and Lucien had trusted him with the architecture of everything, and that trust had not been entirely wrong. The empire had run well, the operations had been clean, the decisions had mostly been sound. Right up until the moment they hadn't. It was not simple. None of it was simple, and Lucien was done pretending that the world he'd built ran on simple things. "The federal investigation has what it has," Lucien said. "I'm not adding to it, and I'm not protecting you from it. Whatever it builds toward, you face on your own." He paused. "What I'm choosing right now, in this room, is to not be the instrument of it, because I'm trying to be done being that." Vincent stared at him. Something moved in his face that was not quite comprehension, and not quite contempt, and not quite any of the things Lucien might have expected. It was closer to bewilderment. The specific bewilderment of a man who had built an entire strategy on knowing his opponent completely, and was discovering, at the moment of execution, that the opponent had become someone different. "Because of her," Vincent said. "Partly," Lucien said, "and partly because I'm 51 years old and I'm tired of what this costs." He picked up the tablet. "You're done in this organization as of this moment. Your operational access is revoked. Your accounts are frozen pending the federal process. You leave this building, and what happens after that is between you and the law." He looked at the remaining captains. "If anyone in this room wants to leave with him, that's their choice. But I need to know now." Nobody moved. Vincent sat for a moment longer. He looked around the table one more time. At Ferraro, who looked at his hands. At Bianchi and Delacroix, who had made their situational calculation and were sitting on the right side of it. At Reyes and Park and Vasquez, who looked at him with the specific expression of men who had just watched something they'd suspected for a while be confirmed. At Harmon, who was the last one Vincent looked at, and who looked back at him with the expression of a man who had almost done something he was very glad right now he hadn't done. Vincent stood. He buttoned his jacket. He straightened his tie with 2 fingers, a small, precise gesture that was so specifically him, so exactly the kind of detail that accumulates over 7 years of proximity that Lucien felt it land in an unexpected place. "You're going to regret choosing soft," Vincent said. Not cruelly, almost clinically. "That's not a threat. It's an observation. Men like us don't get to change what we are by deciding to." "Maybe not," Lucien said, "but I'm going to find out." Vincent walked to the door. He didn't look back. His footsteps on the industrial floor were even and measured, and he went through the door and it closed behind him with a sound that was very quiet for something that final. The room held the silence for a moment. Then Reyes said, "What do you need from us?" Lucien set the tablet back down. He pulled out a chair and sat, because his ribs were telling him things he needed to stop ignoring. "Honesty," he said, "about what's been compromised and what's still clean, starting now and going back as far as it needs to go." He looked around the table. "And then we figure out what this organization looks like from here, whether it keeps existing, what it looks like if it does, and what each of you is willing to live with. It was the most uncertain thing he had said in a boardroom in 22 years. He felt it in the room, the surprise of it, the slight recalibration of the men around him who had never heard him use the word willing in conjunction with the word live before. Park leaned forward and put his hands on the table. "Okay," he said. "Then let's start." He called Nyla from the parking lot at 1:47 in the afternoon. The cold had settled into something serious, the kind of January cold that made the air feel thin. He leaned against the car with his hand pressed against his left side and waited for her to pick up. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," he said. A pause. "Done how?" "Vincent is out of the organization. The federal case will proceed on its own track. Micah's situation is fully documented, and the people who ran the operation this morning are cooperating." He paused. "No one was killed today. I want you to know that." Another pause, longer. He could hear her breathing. "Are you hurt?" she said. "Ribs. It's not serious." "That's not what I asked." He thought about that, about what she was actually asking. "I'm intact," he said. "Which is not the same thing as fine, but it's what I've got right now." "Okay," she said quietly. "Come here. I need to handle a few—" "Lucienne." Her voice was steady and tired and real in the specific way of someone who had been holding things together alone all day and was now done pretending it cost nothing. "Come here." He drove back to Boston in an hour and 12 minutes. Price offered to come up. Lucienne told him to go home. He stood outside the Dorchester triple-decker in the late afternoon gray and looked up at the third-floor window where the kitchen light was on, and he thought about all the evenings in the past 4 weeks where he had known that light was on in a building he had no legitimate reason to enter. He went up the stairs and knocked. She opened the door. She looked at him, the whole of him, the way she looked at things, completely and without pretense, and she stepped back and let him in. The apartment was warm. It smelled like something cooking, which surprised him because he hadn't expected that, hadn't expected her to be doing something as ordinary as cooking on a day like this one had been. The television was on in the other room at low volume. Micah was on the couch with his arm in a simple sling, a bag of frozen peas resting against his shoulder, watching something on his phone with headphones on. He looked up when Lucian came in. They looked at each other for a moment. "How's the shoulder?" Lucian said. "Hurts," Micah said, "but I've had worse." He paused. "Actually, I haven't, but I feel like I should say that." Something unwound very slightly in Lucian's chest. "Fair enough," he said. Micah looked at him for another moment, that direct, evaluating look. And then he put his headphones back on and looked at his phone again, which was, Lucian understood, its own kind of acceptance. Nyla was in the kitchen. He followed. She was stirring something on the stove. Soup, thick and dark. Something with beans and greens that smelled like the kind of food that was meant to restore people. She didn't turn around. She said, "Sit down before you fall down. You're holding your left side." He sat at the kitchen table. The chair was the same chair she'd sat in when she did her monthly accounting. He knew that without being told. It felt like that kind of chair, worn in a specific way, angled slightly toward the window. She set a bowl in front of him and then sat across from him with her own, and they ate for a while without talking, which was the first time in Lucian's recent memory that silence had felt like something being given rather than something being endured. After a while, she said, "What happens now to the organization?" He set his spoon down. "That's a long answer." "I have time." He looked at her. She was eating her soup with the same straightforward attention she gave everything, not performing patience, just actually patient. "The honest answer is that I don't know yet," he said. "There are parts that can be legitimized and parts that can't. The shipping infrastructure is real, the ports, the logistics network, the contracts. Those were always real, built alongside everything else. There are people in the organization who have only ever worked that side of it." He paused. "And there are parts that I've been telling myself were necessary for 22 years that I'm no longer certain I believe that about." She looked at him. "What changed?" 4 weeks in a library," he said. "Watching someone spend every hour of their day making things slightly better for people who had less than her. And understanding that I'd spent the equivalent time doing the opposite and calling it structure, calling it order." He picked up his spoon. I'm not going to tell you I've figured out how to fix it. I haven't. I'm going to tell you I'm going to try because the alternative is continuing to be what I've been, and I don't want that anymore. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing to say. No. And you're not saying it for me. He looked at her directly. I'm saying it because it's true. The fact that you're sitting across from me is... I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter, but the decision is separate from you. It has to be. You told me that yourself. She almost smiled, not quite. I did say that. You say a lot of things worth listening to. The soup was good. He realized he hadn't eaten since the previous night, and the soup was good in the way of food made by someone who cooked with attention, who understood that feeding people was its own form of meaning. He ate most of the bowl before he said, There's something I want to do. I don't know yet if it's possible, but I want to do it. She waited. A foundation, he said, for children's literacy. Real endowment, real reach, not a gesture. Mobile libraries for neighborhoods that don't have branches. Scholarships for programs like the ones you run. The kind of funding that doesn't disappear when the city council changes its priorities. He paused. I have resources that came from a lot of places I'm not proud of. I can't undo where they came from, but I can determine where they go. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her expression fully. There were too many things in it, and some of them were still being formed. That would help a lot of kids, she said. That's the intention. You're not doing it for credit. No. And you're not doing it to impress me. I'm doing it because it's the most useful thing I can think of to do with money I need to do something useful with. He looked at her steadily. If it impresses you, I'm not going to pretend that's an unwanted outcome. She picked up her spoon. I'll think about the logistics, she said, in her librarian voice, the professional one that contained, very faintly, the shape of something warmer inside it. There are organizations I know who do that work, people you'd want to talk to. I'd want you involved, he said, if you're willing. I know, she said. I know you would. She ate for a moment. Let me figure out what that looks like. On my terms. On your terms, he said. From the other room, the low sound of whatever Micah was watching drifted through. A voice, some music, the click of him shifting on the couch. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of an evening that had been earned at a significant price and was now, improbably, occurring. The months that followed were not clean or simple or the way transformation looks in stories where transformation is the whole point. They were slow and complicated and full of the specific difficulty of a man trying to dismantle what he'd built without destroying the people inside it who had built their lives around it. The federal investigation moved on its own schedule. 3 indictments came down in February, 2 connected to the warehouse operation, 1 connected to the financial irregularities that the currency reporting flag had initially identified. Vincent Caldera retained a lawyer and said nothing publicly and appeared in a federal court in March looking the same way he'd always looked, contained, precise, giving nothing away. Lucien appeared voluntarily before a federal grand jury in April. His attorney negotiated the terms. The testimony took 2 days. He answered every question he was asked and did not answer the ones his attorney objected to, and he did not perform remorse or confidence or anything except the truth, which was complicated and specific and cost him considerably more than he'd predicted it would when he'd made the decision to do it. 3 of the 7 captains cooperated fully, 2 cooperated partially. Ferraro took a plea arrangement and retired to a house in Gloucester that his wife had always wanted, and as far as Lucien knew, he spent his days fishing, which was not justice exactly, but was something. Bianchi and Delacroix made their own arrangements through their own attorneys, and Lucien chose not to follow the outcomes closely because there was a limit to how much outcome he could hold at once and still keep functioning. The shipping and logistics infrastructure, stripped of everything that couldn't be documented legitimately, became Devereux Maritime Group and filed with the SEC in June. It employed 412 people across 6 northeastern ports. Lucien kept an office there and showed up most mornings before 7 and stayed until the work was done and went home to an apartment in Back Bay that was significantly smaller than his previous residence, which he had sold and which he was still getting used to. The foundation took longer. The legal structure alone required 4 months and 2 attorneys and 1 extremely patient nonprofit consultant named Diane. who asked him very specific questions about intent and governance and oversight, with the directness of someone who had been burned before by philanthropists who meant well in the abstract and poorly in the specific. He answered her questions honestly, and she told him at the end of the process that she'd worked with worse, which he accepted as the highest compliment available. He named it the Vaughn Foundation. He told Nyla in October, over coffee at the kitchen table in Dorchester. He had been having coffee at that table on Thursday mornings for 4 months by then, not because it had been formally decided, but because it had simply become the thing that happened on Thursday mornings. She looked at him when he said the name. Her expression did the thing he had come to know over months of watching it, the internal weather crossing the surface briefly before she brought it back under control. "You didn't ask me," she said. "No," he said. "Some decisions I made unilaterally. I'm working on it. That's my name." "I know." He held her gaze. "You gave me half a sandwich in the rain and told me kindness mattered most when no one could pay you back. I've been trying to find a way to prove that wrong." He paused. "Consider this the attempt." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her coffee. Then out the window at the Dorchester street, bare-treed in October, the neighborhood going about its morning the way it always had. "I want final say on programming," she said. "Done. And a board that's actually independent. Diane already insisted on it." "Good. Diane sounds smart." She picked up her coffee. "You could have asked me." "I know. I'm sorry." She looked at him. Not with forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was a thing that came later, after the pattern had changed enough times that you started to trust the change, but with something in the direction of it. "Next time ask," she said. "Next time," he said, "I will." The Foundation's opening ceremony was held at the Boylston branch of the Boston Public Library on a Saturday in November, exactly 1 year after a woman had boarded a city bus in the rain with a turkey sandwich in her bag and changed the direction of something she couldn't have known she was changing. The room was full. Teachers and parents and city officials and the kids from the Saturday Reading Circle and Diane, the nonprofit consultant, and Remy, who had come without being asked and stood near the back, looking like he was trying not to look moved. Torres was there. Price was there. Denise from the front desk was there in a blazer she'd pressed that morning, an expression that said she had thoughts about all of this and was choosing, for today, to keep them to herself. Micah was there. His shoulder had healed fully. He'd gotten into a summer program at MIT for high school students interested in engineering, which he'd applied to without telling Nyla until the acceptance came, and which he was going to next summer, and which would be paid for by a scholarship from the Vaughn Foundation's first academic cycle, a fact that had led to a 30-minute conversation between Nyla and Lucien about appropriate boundaries and conflict of interest that ended with Nyla conceding that the scholarship criteria had been blind and Micah had simply been the best applicant, and Lucien conceding that he should have anticipated the optics and they should have talked about it first. They were getting better at talking about things first. It was a process. Lucien stood at the small podium in the library's main reading room, the same room where he had once stood in the shadow of the biography section and watched a woman read to children like it was the most important work anyone could be doing. And he looked at the room, and the room looked back at him. He had prepared remarks. He had written them and revised them twice, and then on Thursday morning he'd left them on the kitchen table in Back Bay and come to Nyla's for coffee and read them to her while she sat across from him with her hands around her mug. And when he finished, she had been quiet for a moment and then said, "It's good. It's a little careful in the middle." "Which part?" "The part where you explain your history without quite owning it." He had looked at her. "That's a hard thing to own in a room full of people." "I know," she said. "Do it anyway." So he stood at the podium and looked at the room and set aside the careful part. He talked about the bus. He described it plainly. A November evening, a city bus going east, a woman across the aisle who heard a stranger's hunger and responded to it without calculating the cost. He described what it felt like to receive something without a price attached, which was not something he had experienced in a very long time, and which he had not known he was starving for until he had it. He talked about coming to the library, about what he had been and what he had been trying to figure out how to stop being. He did not use euphemisms, and he did not perform contrition, and he did not make it tidy. He said, I ran a criminal organization for 22 years. I inherited it, and I built it, and I told myself it had structure and order and that the violence it contained was contained, which was not true. And I came to a library and watched a woman spend her days trying to give children access to the thing that had been the only consistent good in my own childhood, which was books and the worlds inside them. And I understood very slowly and then all at once that I had been building the wrong thing for a very long time. The room was very quiet. He talked about the foundation, what it would fund, how it would operate, the specific gap it was designed to address, the neighborhoods where branch closures and budget cuts had created literal dead zones in children's access to books, mobile libraries, after-school programs, a scholarship cycle that would run annually and be independently adjudicated and could not be touched by him or anyone connected to him once the criteria were set. Then he reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and took out the napkin. It had been with him for a year. The blue diamond print had faded somewhat. The folds were permanent creases now. He held it up and he told the room what it was. He told them where it had come from. He told them that he had carried it every day for 12 months because it was the most valuable thing he owned, not because of what it was, but because of what it proved. That a single unremarkable act by a person who had nothing to spare could change the direction of something much larger than either of them understood at the time. He said, "The most important thing I can tell you is that she didn't know. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know what it would mean. She just heard someone hungry and she responded to it. That's all it was, and it was enough to change everything." He folded the napkin and put it back in his pocket. The applause began near the back of the room. Remy, he thought, and then it spread quickly and completely, and someone was crying near the left wall, and Denise was absolutely not crying, but was looking at the ceiling in a way that suggested the ceiling had suddenly become very interesting, and Micah was clapping with his full arm now, shoulder fully healed, with the particular young man's pride of someone who has watched something hard become something worth having. Nyla was standing to the left of the podium, not behind it, because this was not her moment to be behind anything. She was looking at him with the expression he had been learning for a year, the full weather of it, the complicated interior of a woman who felt things completely and showed you just enough of it to let you know the rest was real. He stepped back from the podium. She took his hand, not dramatically, not for the room, or not only for the room. She took his hand the way you take something you've decided belongs to you, carefully and without performance, the way she had wrapped half a sandwich in a napkin on a city bus and offered it to a stranger without making it a story. They stood like that while the room found its way back to ordinary sound. Children's voices rising, someone laughing near the craft table that Priya had set up in the corner, the particular alive noise of a full room that had somewhere else to go and was choosing to stay a little longer. Micah appeared at Nyla's shoulder. He looked at their joined hands and looked away with the diplomatic speed of a teenager who has chosen to not have an opinion about something and is sticking to it. He said to Lucian, "The history section still needs better organization, just so you know. If you're going to keep coming here." "I've been told," Lucy Yen said. "By who?" "By me, actually," Nyla said. "Last March." "You should have listened then," Micah said, and went to find the cookies that Priya had promised were somewhere near the craft table. Nyla looked at the room. Lucian looked at her, looking at it. The children and the teachers and the books and the November light coming through the tall windows, falling on the stacks in long rectangles. A library on a Saturday. The most ordinary, extraordinary place. "You doing okay?" she said. He thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." She nodded. She didn't let go of his hand. Outside the Boylston Library, Boston went about its November Saturday, cold and bright and indifferent and specific in the way of very old cities that have absorbed a great deal of human experience and simply keep going. Inside, in a room full of laughing children and the particular smell of books and someone's coffee going cold on the checkout desk, a man who had spent 22 years building things that broke people stood beside a woman who spent every day putting things back together. He was not fixed. She had never promised to fix him. That was not what this was. What it was, two people who had each, in their own way, paid the full cost of the lives they'd built, standing in a room full of books, in a city that didn't know their names together yet, holding on. The napkin was in his pocket. The foundation was named. The work was ahead of them. That was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough.